Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. Forget the castles and the kings for now. Tonight, we're heading straight into the smoky heart of a medieval marketplace. The place where diets went to die, and where peasants discovered something dangerously close to happiness. This is the world of medieval junk food. And yes, it was a thing. Sticky, greasy, questionable, but sometimes glorious. From fried apple fritters sizzling in reused pig fat to turnip pies pretending to be dessert, medieval Europe had its own kind of fast food long before the drive-thru was invented. So, before you get comfortable, go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let this be your quiet ritual at the end of a long day. Now, if you enjoy these slow journeys through the stranger corners of history, feel free to subscribe, but only if you genuinely like it here. No pressure. We do this every week. A soft voice, a candle's flicker, and the stories history forgot to make relaxing. And while you're settling in, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Are you somewhere quiet, wrapped in a blanket, or on a night shift, letting this play through your headphones? What time is it where you are? It's always amazing to imagine people drifting to sleep in so many different corners of the world while the past keeps whispering through the dark. Alright, let's set the scene. The year is somewhere in the 1300s. The air smells faintly of wood, smoke and tallow, and the streets are loud with the shouts of vendors. The ground under your boots is soft mud mixed with straw, spilled beer, and optimism. You've worked since dawn, and now, at last, your pockets hold a few small coins, barely enough for bread. Maybe enough for something better. The marketplace is alive tonight. A juggler balancing on a barrel, a drunk monk laughing too loudly, and that smells sweet, fatty, unmistakable, something frying. You follow it, like a moth to a candle, because here's the thing. Even in a world without vending machines or pizza delivery, people still wanted snacks. They craved warmth, fat, sugar, something indulgent to make up for the fact that life was often cold, hard, and cabbage-flavored. The medieval diet was practical bread, ale, onions, maybe a thin stew if you were lucky. But on feast days, or at the market, or after church, people let themselves go a little wild. They wanted something that didn't taste like penance. And that's where junk food was born, not from greed, but from the simple human need to feel good for 5 minutes. You edge closer to the stall. The cook's fire spits and crackles as lumps of dough hiss in a pan of hot fat. The smell is intoxicating, sweet apples, ale batter, and the faint hint of danger. Because deep frying in the 14th century wasn't a hobby, it was a risk. The oil, usually pig fat, had been used more times than anyone could count. It popped and smoked, sending tiny fireworks into the air. But it didn't matter. People crowded around anyway, clutching their wooden bowls, watching as fritters turned golden and crisp. A boy runs past with a grin, clutching a fresh one. He bites in too soon, yelps, then laughs through the pain. Someone hands you one next, hot, crisp on the outside, soft in the middle. It's not perfect. The apples are sour, the batter uneven, and the oil tastes like it's been through several lifetimes. But somehow, it's wonderful. For one moment, you forget the dampness in your shoes and the ache in your back. You forget the cold. You just eat. And the world feels almost kind. That's what medieval junk food was really about. It wasn't fast, it wasn't even safe, but it was joy. The kind of joy that didn't need permission. You didn't need silver plates or a feast day. Just a copper coin and the will to stand in the smoke a little longer. Tonight, we're going to wander through that world together, through the alleys and kitchens of medieval Europe, tasting everything from honey cakes that could double as building materials to candied fennel seeds hard enough to break your teeth, but delicate enough for nobles to nibble between courses. You'll see how turnip pie became the dessert of desperation, how wafers sold outside churches could rival communion bread, and how even blood pudding balls found a place in the hearts and stomachs of medieval snackers. It's easy to imagine the Middle Ages as grey and grim, all mud and misery. But food, even the junk kind, tells a different story. It's proof that people back then weren't that different from us. They wanted comfort, laughter, and the delicious distraction of a warm bite in cold weather. Every snack had a story, and every story had a touch of chaos. As you listen tonight, imagine the flicker of torches reflecting off copper pots. Hear the sound of the market fading into evening, the hum of voices, the distant toll of pots, church bells, the hiss of something frying for just a few pennies more. Smell the sweetness of honey and ale, the sharp tang of vinegar, and that faint undercurrent of wood smoke that seemed to cling to everything. You're not a tourist here. You're part of it now, just another hungry soul in a world that found ways to make even misery taste good. So, take a deep breath. Let the noise of your day fall away. In a moment, we'll step fully into that world and start our journey properly with the first of many questionable delights. The apple fritter, a medieval donut without the safety standards. It's hot, it's sweet, it's probably been dropped once or twice, but it's worth every bite. And as we move through this night through stalls, kitchens, taverns, and monasteries, you'll see just how inventive, reckless, and human these people really were. Because if there's one thing history proves over and over again, it's that no matter how bleak the times, someone, somewhere, will always find a way to make something deliciously unnecessary. So settle in. Let the candle burn low. This is Candlelit history. And tonight, we're going to eat our way through the medieval world, one questionable snack at a time. The morning breaks grey and thin, and the chill seeps through the shutters of your little cottage. You wake to the sound of church bells and the faint scent of smoke curling from the hearth next door. Somewhere down the muddy lane, a merchant's cart rattles over cobblestones, and a dog barks as if personally offended by the new day. You pull your cloak tighter, step outside, and your breath hangs white in the air. The market is waking too slow, groggy, and hungry, and there it is again, that smell. The same one from last night's dream. Something frying. It floats through the air like a promise, rich, sweet, and almost sinful. You follow it through the morning fog, past the butcher's stall where pigs' feet dangle like ornaments, past the fishmonger laying out the day's catch with the resigned expression of a man who's been splashed too many times before. At the far end of the square, you find it, a small wooden stand, its planks blackened by smoke and years of frying. The woman behind it is stirring a bowl with the focus of someone guarding a secret. She doesn't look up, but her voice cuts through the din. You want one? You nod. You don't even know what it is yet, but you already want it. She scoops something pale and lumpy from the bowl, drops it into a pan of boiling fat, and it hisses like a snake. The scent explodes apples, ale, and danger. Around you, villagers gather, coins clinking, children bouncing on their heels, a monk pretending he's only here to observe for research. This, you realize, is the closest thing medieval Europe ever had to a donut stand. Apple fritters, or frittors of Apiles, as they might have called them in a recipe book, were the kind of treat that made peasants feel briefly wealthy and made the wealthy pretend they weren't just peasants with fancier clothes. But this wasn't your shiny supermarket apple. No, these apples were small, misshapen, and usually stolen from someone else's orchard. They were chopped roughly, mixed into a batter of flour and eggs, and if the cook was feeling generous, splashed with a bit of ale. Not for flavor, mind you, but because water was a gamble. Ale was safer and gave the illusion of joy. The real danger came next, the frying. Oil in the medieval world was almost always animal fat, thick, smoky, and reused more times than anyone wanted to admit. It was saved and strained, sometimes flavored with herbs, sometimes with the memory of a dozen previous meals. When it hit the fire, it spat and crackled, coating the air with a haze that was equal parts delicious and alarming. And yet, no one cared. You'd wait, coins warm in your palm, until the cook flipped the golden disc with a wooden spoon. When she finally handed it over, steaming and glistening, you didn't think about hygiene or calories. You thought about survival, about warmth, about the simple fact that something this good shouldn't exist in a world where dinner was usually cabbage pretending to be stew. You bite in. The edges crunch. The middle burns your tongue. There's that sharp sweetness of apple mixed with bitterness from the ale, the kind of flavor that shouldn't work but somehow does. For a brief, shining moment, you could almost believe that life isn't just toil and mud. Of course, not everyone could afford the luxury of sweetness. Sugar was a symbol of status imported from faraway islands and locked in chests like treasure. The wealthy might dust their fritters with it just to show off, letting that faint shimmer catch the light as servants carried them through great halls. For everyone else, there was honey or thick syrup made from boiled wine, sticky and fragrant, poured over the top until the fritter gleamed like lacquered gold. It didn't just taste good, it looked good. And in a time where everything around you was grey or brown, that mattered. You glance around at the others eating beside you. There's a farmer with straw still stuck to his hair, chewing thoughtfully and nodding like he's just had a religious experience. A child licks her fingers clean and immediately goes back for another. Two women argue over whether the cook has changed her oil since last week. They decide she hasn't, but that it's better that way. For a few copper pennies, you've bought not just food, but community. These moments of shared indulgence huddled together around the smell of something frying were small acts of rebellion against the cold logic of survival. Life in the 1300s was short, unpredictable, and often cruel. So, when something hot and sweet landed in your hand, you didn't question it. You ate it fast, before life noticed and took it away again. Behind the stall, the cook hums quietly, dipping and frying, her sleeves rolled up to the elbow. She's probably made thousands of these fritters in her lifetime. Her face glows red from the heat, her hands glisten with oil, but her eyes are sharp. This is more than food to her, it's currency, comfort, and craft. A good fritter can turn a few stolen apples into a week's worth of income. She nods toward the stack cooling by the fire, and you notice the differences, some small and perfect, some lumpy and scorched. In the Middle Ages, even junk food had personality. The fritter in your hand is nearly gone. You look at the last bite, sticky, golden, and cooling fast, and think about how much human history is built on little things like this. Not the grand battles or coronations, but the quiet joys that slipped between them. The moment when someone decided, what if we dipped that in hot fat, and changed the world in a small, crispy way. As the crowd thins, the woman sets down her ladle and looks at you. You should come back later, she says. After Vespers, when the cheese man sets up, he's got something new this week. You nod, pocketing the idea like another coin. She doesn't explain further, but you've heard the rumors about the monks and their cheese, soft and squeaky and strangely addictive. They say it doesn't melt, doesn't stretch, and doesn't behave like cheese at all. Some call it curd, some call it a miracle, others call it lunch. You glance once more at the frying pan, still bubbling away, and for a moment you can almost see the reflection of a dozen centuries of cooks doing the same thing, all trying to make something cheap taste like joy. You step away, your fingers still sticky, the taste of apple and ale lingering on your tongue. The bells ring again in the distance, calling everyone to prayer or business or whatever counts as purpose in this town. But you're already thinking ahead to the monks, to the cheese, to the next indulgence waiting just down the lane. Because in a world built on hardship, one truth never changes. There's always another snack. And this next one? Well, it squeaks when you bite it. You follow the sound before you even know what it is. A low, rhythmic squelch, like wet cloth being wrung out again and again. It's coming from the far edge of the market square, past the fishmonger, past the baker's stall, where steam still rises from round loaves of rye. You weave through the crowd until you see it. A wooden cart with a small bell tied to the side, its surface lined with blocks of pale wobbling cheese. The air smells faintly sour, faintly rich, the scent of milk on the edge of transformation. The man behind the cart isn't a merchant in the usual sense. His robe gives him away: brown wool, rope belt, sandals that have seen too many muddy roads. A monk. Which makes sense, because if anyone in medieval Europe knew how to turn milk into money, it was the monks. They'd mastered the quiet science of fermentation long before dairy became a word you could print on packaging. He nods to you without smiling. Fresh curds, he says, voice like gravel rubbed in butter. Made this morning. You look down. The curds glisten in a shallow basket, small lumps of off-white, uneven and slightly damp. They don't look like much, but people around you are already buying them, paying in coins, bread, or even eggs. You hand him a copper penny, and he scoops a handful into a small scrap of cloth, folds it neatly, and passes it to you. Eat soon, he warns. They don't last long. He's right, these are not cheeses built for glory or travel. They're fragile, fleeting things. Curds are what happens before cheese becomes serious, before it hardens into the stuff you can hammer a nail with. They're the soft, squishy stage baby cheese. The first product of milk that's been coaxed apart into curds and whey, usually by adding something called rennet. You don't ask what rennet is. You don't want to know. But because you're living in the 14th century, you find out anyway. Rennet, the monk explains, comes from the stomach lining of a calf, or sometimes a lamb. It's full of enzymes that separate milk into solid and liquid curds and whey. It's a little gruesome, sure. But in a world where nothing goes to waste, it's practical magic. You can almost imagine the first monk who discovered it, probably a traveling friar carrying milk in a pouch made from an animal's stomach, only to find that by the end of the journey, it had transformed into something thick and edible. A miracle, if you're feeling optimistic, a digestive accident, if you're not. You unwrap the cloth and look down at your snack. The curds are soft, a little shiny, and faintly warm from the morning's work. You pop one into your mouth. It's chewy, not in a bad way, just strange. It squeaks faintly against your teeth, as if it's protesting its own fate. The taste is mild, salty, faintly sour, like milk that's decided to grow up but hasn't quite figured out how. Not exactly thrilling, but oddly comforting. Around you, others are eating theirs too. Farmers, merchants, even a group of travelers resting by the fountain. No one seems in a hurry. They eat slowly, thoughtfully, like this is a small moment of calm before going back to the hard business of being alive. And in a way, that's exactly what curds are, edible reassurance. You don't have to celebrate to enjoy them, you just have to need something reliable. The monk starts packing up his cart, and you watch as he drains a bucket of whey, the cloudy, thin liquid left behind after the curds have formed. He doesn't waste it. Nothing in this world gets wasted. The whey might feed pigs, or be turned into soup, or left to ferment into something drinkable for those who don't mind beverages that smell like regret. You're struck again by the medieval genius for thrift. Everything had a purpose, even failure. You ask him how often he makes curds. Every day, he says. We keep the milk from the abbey cows. It spoils if you don't work fast. Some days we press the curds to make hard cheese. Other days, we sell them like this. You imagine the abbey, a quiet stone building, surrounded by fields and the lowing of cattle. Inside, monks moving in silence, stirring great vats of milk with long wooden paddles. The air heavy with steam and the smell of souring cream. Outside, children waiting with empty baskets, hoping for a handful of the soft stuff. In a time before refrigeration, cheese was survival. It meant food that wouldn't vanish overnight. But these curds, these little squeaky pieces of dairy, were the reward you ate before the serious work began. As you chew another piece, you can't help but smile. The flavor isn't exciting, but it's honest. Like bread, or faith, or the feeling of clean linen drying in the wind. You start to understand why monks loved making cheese. It wasn't just food, it was order, structure, proof that the world could be tamed, at least for a little while. The monk clears his throat. You like it, you nod. It's different, he chuckles softly. That's what people always say, until they realize they've eaten all of it. He's right again, the cloth is empty. You lick your fingers, surprised at how satisfying it was. Not sweet, not rich, just simple, clean, and strangely addictive. Cheese curds might not have been glamorous, but they were dependable. They didn't spoil as fast as milk, didn't require a feast to justify them, and could be eaten in any season. Travelers carried them in pouches. Children chewed them like candy. Even cats got their share when no one was looking. The monks called them a gift of humility, though theirs. Nothing particularly humble about hoarding the only edible protein within 50 miles. As you turn to leave, the monk stops you. If you liked those, he says, lowering his voice, you should visit the fair on St. Crispin's Day. There'll be meat pies, real ones. You raise an eyebrow. Meat? He nods solemnly. Whatever counts as it. You grin, half in curiosity, half in suspicion. Meat pies, or pasties, as people call them, are legendary for being equal parts mystery and meal. Wrapped in thick pastry crusts, they're the original travel food, hand-sized, hot, and full of secrets. Some say the miners mark their initials on the crusts before eating, to claim their share and appease the ghosts of the mine. Others whisper that the crust isn't always just for eating. It's a handle for dirty hands, tossed away after the filling is gone. But that's a story for another day. The monk gives you a small wave as you walk back toward the town square. The air feels colder now, sharper. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, still thinking about the cheese, about the simplicity of it. The way it squeaked softly, like it wanted to stay alive a little longer. You realize how much effort went into something so small, how many invisible hands kept the rhythm of daily life turning. Milk to curd, curd to cheese, cheese to comfort. Nothing wasted, nothing too precious to be eaten. As you cross the square, a gust of wind carries a new smell toward you: baked pastry, hot fat, and meat. The kind of smell that cuts through every sense and goes straight to your stomach. Somewhere nearby, someone shouts, "Fresh pasties, hot from the oven." Your mouth waters instantly. You pause, torn between reason and hunger. You know what meat means in this world. It could be rabbit, pigeon, or something far less respectable, but your curiosity wins. You start walking toward the source, the echo of frying fat guiding you like a compass, because if the apple, fritter, was the medieval donut, and cheese curds were the popcorn, then the meat pasty, that flaky, steaming miracle of crust and mystery filling, is where junk food grows up, gets bold, and dares you to take a bite without asking questions. You follow the scent of pastry through the square, like a pilgrim chasing a relic, but the shout you heard, "Fresh pasties," comes from somewhere behind a wall of people. A juggler drops a wooden ball, a chicken flaps indignant wings, and by the time you squeeze past a barrel of pickled something, you've drifted to the wrong stall entirely. Here, a different kind of pie waits, golden, rustic, and proudly unlabeled. The woman selling them has flour on her cheeks, confidence in her eyes, and a peel board for an altar. She hooks you with a single sentence: "Sweet pie just out of the oven." Sweet? In this economy? You step closer. The pies aren't large. They're sturdy, a palm and a half wide, baked in rough clay dishes. Their lids are sealed and pinched with care, no fancy crests, no heraldic swans, just the kind of pie that looks like it wants to survive a long walk home. "What's inside?" you ask, because hope is free. She cracks one open with a wooden blade and releases a breath of steam so fragrant it stops conversation in a 2-yard radius. The filling is pale, mashed to velvet, with the occasional glint of something dark and promising, maybe a currant, maybe a trick. "Turnip," she says, as if confessing a minor sin. Turnip with a little sweetness. Turnip. Your brain flinches, your mouth is curious, and your stomach votes yes with both hands. She slides the pie into your bowl and drizzles it with a ribbon of syrup so glossy it could pass for lacquer. You take a spoon and steal the first bite. It's warm, thick, and surprisingly polite on the tongue. The turnip has surrendered its bitterness to heat and patience. There's a ghost of sweetness that catches late honey or boiled wine, reduced to a sticky whisper, followed by something herbal and kind. Not decadent, not festive, but earnest. You take another bite to decide whether you like it or just respect its effort. Here's the truth. The crust won't admit out loud. This is dessert by negotiation. Sugar is a rumor in most households. Fruit is hostage to the season and to birds with bad manners. Turnips, however, obey. They come out of the ground when you ask, and sometimes when you don't. They keep their shape in the cellar, and they show up in soups, mash, and now apparently ambition. A clever cook, can coax them toward pudding with egg, a splash of something sweet, and the courage to call it good. The pie woman has courage in spades. She tells you the crust was mixed at dawn, kneaded with rendered fat, and the heel of her hand until it held together like a promise. 2 turns, she says, proud of the layers she's managed. It's not puff pastry, it's stubborn pastry, built to keep the steam in and the world out. Some houses use a crust simply as a container, a tough shell called a coffin that never gets eaten. Not here. Her lid is crisp and ready for duty, and yes, you will eat it. She nods at the oven door across the lane. A squat, domed belly of brick glowing from within. Communal bake, she explains. We fire it on market mornings. Everyone brings what they've got. You picture a parade of hopeful dishes, loaves scarred by thumbprints, pots of stew with sprigs of something green, pies like this one, all lined up on long boards to slide into the heat. The oven sighs, and the square smells briefly of wood, flour, and relief. Another bite. Now you locate the dark glints, dried fruit, a few brave currants. They give the illusion of extravagance, the way a single candle lights an entire room if you want it to. Someone behind you says, "Is that nutmeg?" The way a person in your century might say, "Is that gold?" The pie woman shrugs. A shaving, she concedes, which in practical terms means a cousin came home from the coast and wanted to be admired. Turnip pie lives in that strange borderland between we deserve joy and we can afford turnips. It works because of texture as much as taste. The mash is soft enough to soothe, rich enough to pretend. You find yourself slowing down, not because it's heavy, though it is that, but because it makes you contemplative. Dessert isn't a category here, it's a mood, a permission slip signed by thrift. A small boy at your elbow negotiates a pie of his own, with a handful of hazelnuts and a promise to stack firewood for the oven keeper. He wins, because in markets like this, currency has always been wider than coin. The woman scores his crust with the back of her knife, 2 quick lines that say, "This one is yours, if anyone forgets." Ownership, in pastry form. While you eat, you listen. A pair of sisters argue over spice pepper. They insist wakes a sweet dish like a slap and is therefore noble. A pilgrim swears he tasted almond. In last week's batch, he did not. He tasted hope. A clerk from the Guildhall asks whether the sweet pie will be made for Saints' Days. "If I can keep the bees obedient," the woman says dryly. Everyone laughs, because everyone knows bees are the real landlords. You consider the economics of pleasure. A pie like this solves a problem. How to end a meal with kindness when you have nothing that fits the part. It turns a root that belongs in pottage into something you can carry outside and share. It's a performance, but an honest one. You catch yourself smiling, spoon scraping the last of the mash, and feel a twinge of admiration for the way the Middle Ages keeps inventing workarounds. When desire hits a wall, it builds a door out of dough. The woman hands you a rag to wipe your fingers and slides a second pie toward an old mason with mortar under his nails. "For your granddaughter," she says, and he nods, like she's saved his dignity. Pies do that here, wrap generosity in something you can hand to someone without a speech. You tilt your empty bowl to catch the last amber streak of syrup. It tastes faintly of grapes cooked down until they remember summer. Someone asks whether she'll bake a Lord's pie for the winter feast. Apples, spices, maybe a brush of rose water if the trade carts arrive. She doesn't promise, but she doesn't say no. A gust laments through the square, flipping a few market awnings. The oven keeper calls out that the heat is falling. A man in a leather apron jogs by carrying a tray of something savory that smells like roasted fields and secrets. The crowd tilts as if pulled by a tide. You turn to go, intending finally to find the meat pasty stall you missed. But the pie woman taps the board with her knife and lowers her voice just for you. "If you're after pasties," she says, "listen for the crack of crust when they break one open."
It sounds different, like stepping on fresh ice.
Fresh ice. Your mouth answers before your reason can. You thank her, slip back into the slow river of bodies, and let your ears do the work. Somewhere ahead, something brittle gives way. and the aroma leaps to meet you. Hot fat meeting meat and herbs, pastry flaking into edible confetti, a rush of pepper sharp enough to tickle your nose. The sound happens again, crack followed by a murmur of approval, and the low hum that markets make when what's promised is delivered. You're almost there, edging past a cooper's stack of hoops, when a miner's laugh booms like a drum, and a vendor calls, "Mind the steam." The crowd parts just enough for you to glimpse the sauce. Half-moon pies, their edges crimped like rope, initials scored into the ridge to claim them from greedy hands. The vendor cuts one, and from the slit comes a curl of vapor that smells like comfort and risk in equal measure. You take a step closer, bowl ready, coins, warm, appetite sharpened by turnip honesty. The vendor lifts a pasty with iron tongs, tips it toward you, and says, "Ask me what's inside, if you dare." You open your mouth, not at all sure you want the answer, because in this town, meat could mean anything that ran, flew, slithered, or swam. And everything inside that crust is a secret kept by heat. The crowd around the stall shifts like a living tide, miners with soot still streaked across their faces, washerwomen with sleeves rolled to the elbow, a tanner who smells faintly of everything he's ever touched. They're here for one reason: pasties. The vendor stands behind a wide wooden board piled high with them, their half-moon shapes glistening with a thin sheen of fat, edges crimped tight like they're guarding state secrets. A thin curl of steam drifts from one cracked crust and catches the light, glowing briefly before vanishing into the cold air. He looks up, spots you watching, and grins the kind of grin that says, "You'll regret this and thank me anyway." "Hot pasty," he calls, lifting one with a pair of iron tongs. Still breathing, this one. You hesitate for half a second, long enough for the miner beside you to laugh. "Don't ask what's in it," he warns, slapping a coin onto the board. "Just eat it while it's hot. That's the trick." The vendor exchanges coins for pastry, and before you can overthink it, you do the same. He hands it over, wrapped in a scrap of parchment blackened by the heat. It's heavier than you expect, warm enough to sting your palms. You hold it the way the others do by the thick, ridged edge, the part that looks more like a handle than food. And then, following the unspoken rule of the market, you take a bite. The crust gives way with a soft crack. Inside, the filling steams out a rich, meaty smell that hits first with pepper, then with something smoky, then something you can't quite name. You chew carefully. Because this is the Middle Ages, and you've learned that meat is more a suggestion than a fact. It's savory, fatty, faintly gamey, and you realize with a kind of amused horror that it's delicious. The miner leans in. "That one's probably rabbit," he says. "Or pigeon. Or both. Doesn't matter. As long as it's not yesterday's, you're safe." You swallow, still unsure if safe is optimism or denial. But you get it now. This is what people live for. The pasty isn't just food. It's freedom you can hold in your hand. You can eat it walking to work, on the road, or in a mine so dark that your face never sees sunlight. It's a whole meal wrapped in armor. The vendor, broad-shouldered, flour-dusted, and far too proud, starts his pitch again for the next wave of customers. "Real meat, real crust, no bones," he shouts, though a few people snicker quietly at that claim. "Made fresh at dawn, keeps till dusk. You can drop it, stomp it, or use it as a pillow. It'd still be good." And he's right. The crust is thick for a reason. It's a protective shell designed to survive travel and grubby hands. In the tin mines of Cornwall and the coal seams farther north, workers would eat these every day, holding the crust by the edge while their hands were still black with soot. They'd eat down to the seam, then toss the dirty handle aside for luck or, depending on who you ask, to feed the spirits who lived underground. Ghosts of the deep, soot-faced and hungry, were said to demand a piece. Better to share a bite than risk a cave-in. You take another mouthful, and it hits differently this time, richer, spicier. There's onion in there, maybe leek, maybe herbs crushed fine enough that they hide their identity. The mix of flavors tells its own story. This cook's seen enough spice merchants to know how to fake sophistication. A pinch of pepper, a dash of garlic, even a trace of sage, each one worth its weight in silver, but used here like defiance. Poor food dressed in noble perfume. You glance around and notice that no two pasties look the same. Some are pale and even, others burnt at the edges or split open like volcanoes mid-eruption. There's a kind of democracy in that. Rich or poor, priest or peasant, everyone eats them. You just get better fillings if your title comes with land. The tanner beside you chuckles through a mouthful. My brother swears the gentry fill theirs with venison and bacon, he says. Says he once saw a pie with trout in it. Trout. In pastry. Can you imagine? He laughs, coughs, then adds, course, the rest of us make do with whatever twitches slower than we do. You smile, chewing slowly, letting the humor settle in. It's absurd, but it's also true. In a time before refrigeration, nothing went to waste. Eel, pigeon, squirrel, hedgehog if it moved. Someone's grandmother figured out how to mince it, season it, and hide it inside dough. The spice trade only made the game more exciting. Pepper could disguise almost anything. If you couldn't tell what animal it had been, that was considered a feature, not a flaw. Someone near the front of the line asks about vegetarian versions. The vendor grins like a fox. Aye, he says. We've got those too. Carrot, turnip, onion, and despair. The crowd roars with laughter, and a few coins change hands anyway. You watch him work, and there's an artistry to it. He moves fast, sliding trays in and out of the oven, marking each pasty with a quick twist of his thumb or a scratched initial. Every mark means something. Ownership, a family recipe, or a promise to deliver it later to someone who can't leave their worksite. Each crust carries identity in flour and grease. When you finally reach the center of the crowd, you notice a large pot simmering beside the oven. The smell is deep, iron-rich, almost metallic. Curiosity wins. What's that, you ask? He raises an eyebrow. You don't want to. You raise both of yours. I really do. He chuckles. That's tomorrow's filling. Bits from the butcher, blood to thicken it, some oats if I can find 'em. Good for the stomach, bad for your conscience. They call it blood pudding, though it's more like a dare. The crowd groans and laughs, but you notice the pot still bubbling away, slow and confident, like it knows it'll have customers by dawn. You can already imagine the scene, people crowding back here tomorrow, drawn by the same smoke and hunger, convincing themselves that fried blood is comfort if you fry it long enough. You finish the last bite of your pasty and realize how satisfying it is, heavy, filling, a small miracle of balance between necessity and indulgence. It's the perfect medieval contradiction, practical enough to feed laborers, decadent enough to impress lords, dangerous enough to keep you curious. The vendor takes back your parchment and nods toward the alehouse at the far end of the parchment. If you're still hungry, he says, there's a woman there who sells sweets, candied things, fennel seeds, she says, cleans your breath, settles your belly, though I reckon they break more teeth than they fix. You laugh, thank him, and tuck that piece of information away. The pasty's warmth lingers in your stomach as you walk, the smell of pastry fading behind you. Somewhere ahead, the air shifts less savory now, sharper, almost floral, sweetness in the air. You follow it down a narrow lane where light filters through smoke, and there, under a faded awning, sits a woman with jars of tiny shining seeds. They glitter like little pearls of sugar, catching the firelight as if they're alive. She looks up and smiles. A treat for the end of your meal, she says softly. Candied fennel. Cleans the mouth, they say. Keeps the spirits sweet. You take a step closer, drawn by curiosity and the faint licorice scent. You can't help but think. From blood pudding to sugared seeds, the entire human condition. Right there, in one street. And as you reach for the jar, she says, careful. They're harder than sin. The woman's table gleams like a treasure chest. Jars of glass and clay line the boards, each filled with tiny sugared jewels, candied fennel, anise, coriander, even a few pieces of ginger that glow amber through the firelight. The smell is strange, half sweetness, half medicine. It cuts through the heavy scent of meat and pastry still hanging in the market air. After a day of salt, smoke, and grease, your tongue almost pleads for something sharp and clean. Go on, she urges, lifting a jar and shaking it gently. The seeds rattle like coins. They're good for your stomach, good for your breath, good for your soul, if you believe the monks. You reach in with 2 fingers and take a pinch. They're smaller than you expect, tiny round pearls, each one coated in hardened sugar, so polished they almost sparkle. You pop one into your mouth. Crunch. Then again, harder this time. Crunch, crack, ouch. The sweetness hits, then the fennel bursts through, sharp, herbal, and vaguely like licorice, left too long in the sun. The woman laughs softly. See? The first one always fights back. You can't help but smile. It's ridiculous, dangerous candy in an age when life is already hazardous enough, but somehow that makes it perfect. In a world of mud and toil, this is edible luxury. And it tastes like survival, dressed up as celebration. Candied fennel seeds were the medieval answer to many things. Bad breath, bad digestion, bad manners. After feasts, the wealthy would serve them in little bowls carved from wood or brass, letting guests pinch a few and chew delicately. Not that anyone was delicate, for long fennel's flavor demanded attention. You either loved it or politely swallowed it whole. Either way, it was the last taste of the night, the punctuation mark after too much mutton and mead. The woman pours a small handful into your palm. Keep them rolling on your tongue, she advises. They last longer that way. Makes the sweetness stretch. You nod, though chewing is inevitable. The sugar shell is brittle, almost glassy. You can imagine how much work went into making something so small and unnecessary. Sugar, after all, wasn't common. It came from far away, through endless trade routes that carried not only sweetness but stories. From the fields of Cyprus and Sicily, down through Arab ports, across the Mediterranean in wooden barrels, and finally into the hands of merchants who charged enough to make a bishop sweat. Every granule of sugar in these seeds has traveled farther than most people ever would in their lifetime. How do you make them, you ask, watching her hands as she refills a jar. With patience and burned fingers, she says dryly. You take the seeds, you boil sugar till it's almost angry, then you pour it over, one ladle at a time, let it dry, then do it again and again, until your arms ache and the sugar gives up and hardens. You try to imagine that, standing over a pot for hours, stirring molten sweetness while the air fills with the scent of caramel and risk. The idea of turning something so ordinary, a seed, a weed, really into a luxury treat feels almost alchemical. It's not just cooking, it's transformation. A peasant with a sweet tooth could only dream of it. But nobles? Nobles served them as symbols of refinement. A clean mouth meant a clean soul, or at least the illusion of one. Some call them confits, the woman adds, sealing another jar with wax. Good for the belly, they say. Settle the humors after a heavy meal. That's the medieval mind at work again. The belief that the body was a balance of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and that every bite of food could tilt the scales toward health or disaster. Fennel, with its aromatic bite, was thought to chase away melancholy and sluggishness. Sugar, of course, was warmth and cheer distilled. Put the two together, and you had medicine disguised as pleasure. A little sweet, a little sin, a little science. The perfect trio. You glance around. It's evening now, the market thinning to embers. The shadows grow long, stretching across the cobblestones. A musician tunes a lute nearby, plucking tentative notes that sound like the last light slipping away. The woman starts packing up her jars, but she pauses when she catches you still chewing. Careful, she says, they'll pull a tooth if you're not patient. You grin through the crunch. Worth it, she nods approvingly. Then you understand. The best things usually are. Her apprentice, a girl no older than 12, wraps a few handfuls in a small cloth and ties it with string. For later, she says shyly, pressing it into your palm. They keep well if you don't mind the noise. You slip the bundle into your pocket. The seeds clicking softly like dice as you walk away. It's a comforting sound, like carrying a secret. Past the market square, the streets grow quieter. You pass a tavern where laughter spills out of open shutters. Someone inside is telling a story loud enough for everyone to hear, something about a feast, a wedding, and a honey cake so heavy it broke the table it was served on. The crowd roars with laughter, and the smell of mead and spice follows you down the lane. Honey cake. The words stick in your mind. If candied fennel seeds were the noble's after-dinner jewel, honey cake was the people's crown. Simple, dense, sweet, and made with the one ingredient everyone trusted, honey. It didn't rot, didn't sour, and didn't need to cross oceans to arrive. Bees did all the hard work, and for that, humanity owed them nearly everything. You slow your steps, caught by the sound of someone singing softly nearby.
A woman stands by an open oven, lifting golden slabs of honey cake from a tray and brushing the tops with warm syrup until they glisten.
The air smells of warmth itself, honey, flour, and the faint burn of sugar at the edge of perfection. A few children hover, eyes wide, waiting for the leftovers to cool enough to steal. You can't help yourself. You step closer. The woman looks up, smiling with the weary pride of someone who knows exactly how good her creation smells. "You've come at the right time," she says, setting down the brush. "They're still soft, but give them an hour, and you could build a wall with them." You laugh, already reaching for a coin. She shakes her head. "No coins tonight, just stories. Tell me what you've eaten so far." You list them: apple fritters, cheese curds, turnip pies, meat pasties, and now candied fennel seeds. She listens, nodding at each one as if ticking boxes on a map. "Then this is the only way to finish that journey," she says. "Honey cake,
Sweet enough to make you forget how hard the day's been."
You take one, warm and sticky, and bite in. It's dense, chewy, rich with honey, and a hint of spice that lingers at the back of your throat. Not soft like modern cake, but honest like everything else you've eaten today. It tastes of work, and patience, and joy carefully rationed. As you eat, she leans closer and lowers her voice. "There's something you should know," she says. "The best honey doesn't come from hives." You blink. "What do you mean?" She smiles, mysterious, and nods toward the woods beyond the village. "There's wild honey out there, untamed, fierce, made by bees that answer to no one. The monks call it dangerous, the peasants call it divine. And tomorrow, the gatherers go to find it." The wind shifts, carrying the faint hum of distant bees through the night air. You swallow the last bite of cake, the sweetness lingering on your tongue, and realize she's not talking about a recipe anymore. She's talking about a hunt, one that might sting back. Night folds over the lanes like a warm cloak, and the square settles into that soft hour when voices turn low and fires glow steady. You carry the memory of candied fennel's snap and the pasties' heat, but it's the honey cake that lingers sweet, dense, and humming in your chest, like a quiet chord that refuses to fade. The baker's words keep circling back. Wild honey, untamed, the gatherers go at dawn. Sleep doesn't come quickly. You lie awake on a straw mattress, listening to the creak of rafters and the small animal sounds a timber house always makes. Somewhere outside, a night watchman taps his staff on stone, and a dog answers with one half-hearted bark. When you finally doze, you dream of dark trees stitched together by moonlight and a sound like distant rain. At first light, you're already moving, the world pearl grey and damp with dew. Beyond the last cottages, the path narrows and then tilts into woods, the kind that smell of leaf mold and stories old enough to have grown lichen. Two figures wait at the edge where the hedgerow breaks. A man with a coil of rope over his shoulder, and a woman carrying a smoking pot whose lid is holed like a star chart. They nod at you the way people nod to anyone who understands that silence is also a kind of oath. They do not wear armor, but they look like they should. Thick wool, leather cuffs, veils pushed up for now, clothes sewn with the memory of stings. The man touches the pot with 2 fingers. "Gentle smoke," he says. "It asks the bees to be calm." He doesn't say what happens if they refuse. The trees close, trunks like pillars, the canopy a stained glass green. You walk until the path gives up and becomes suggestion. The woman points. There, tucked in a split oak, higher than a man can reach, is a seam of amber wax. Not a kept hive but a house found. With the entrance a coin-sized mouth where late bees drift in and out like thoughts that can't decide to stay. The sound is steady, pleased with itself. No panic, not yet. Smoke rises in cooling ribbons as the lid lifts. It smells of damp straw and a sweetness that isn't the honey yet, but knows it will be. The man climbs bare feet on bark, rope over branch, his movements practiced and unshowy. He pauses, waits for the smoke to settle into the hollow, then reaches in with gloved hands and eases the prize free. Comb built in spirals and ledges, thick as a book of psalms, dripping gold in the angled light. They work like people who have made peace with consequence, not plunderers, gardeners of a dangerous garden. A share stays for the colony, always. A share comes down for the living, also always. When the comb touches the basket, it chatters faintly against wicker, soft hexagons, speaking to woven twigs, and the woman smiles the way bakers smile when a dough lifts the cloth. You walk back slow, the basket between you. Bees follow a little, then change their minds, like loyal friends reconsidering a bad idea. In the village, the day has opened its eyes. Smoke lifts from kitchens, and somewhere a bell rings, 3 small notes that could mean anything. Work, prayer, the first loaf done. The baker waits by her doorway, sleeves rolled, hair netted tight. A pan sits ready on a trivet, iron warmed till it sweats. She gestures you in without wasting words. Flour and ground seed lie measured in a wooden bowl. A pinch of tempering spice perched like a rumor. She works with deliberate slowness, no show for you, only the ritual that makes a recipe become itself. Wild comb meets the knife, a sigh, a slump, a shining. The runoff is summer liquefied flowers and sun, and a dozen secret meadows you'll never see. She catches it in a clay pitcher, flicks out a stray bee with the back of her nail, and tips a first ribbon into the dry. The dough takes it like a drought takes rain, darkening, then relaxing under her knuckles. When it clings properly, no more, no less, she presses it into a low square tin and smooths the top with wet palm. What makes a cake, you ask, though you already know the answer, is never only honey. Restraint, she says, without looking up. And heat that doesn't shout. Into the oven it goes, no tantrums, only patience. She brushes a second pan with fat, pours in the rest of the honey, and adds a twist of something sharp you can't place at first. A little vinegar, she says, catching your glance, keeps the sweetness honest. While the cake sets, she tells you what honey means here. Sugar is a lord's whim. Honey is a neighbor. Honey keeps. Honey travels in songs when grain runs thin. It binds oat to feast and cracked wheat to wedding. It shines a crust so a child thinks of saints. And when winter gets rude, honey sits quiet on the shelf and waits without souring. A jar-shaped promise that spring will remember your address. The loaf comes out with edges turned a deep, persuasive brown. Not a soft cake, no apology in it, but close-grained and dignified, like wood that's been planed until it reveals its rings. She pokes the top with a straw, then spoons warm honey into the punctures, each one a small well that drinks until it can't. Steam lifts, scented now with a whisper of cloves, and the ghost of last year's apples dried to shards and folded into the batter with the kind of care that says, "We saved these for the right mouths." You queue at the door with 3 children and a mason's wife, everyone pretending not to count slices. Your piece lands on a wooden shard that used to be a bucket. The first bite pulls at your teeth, then lets go, leaving behind warmth so complete you wonder if your ribs were cold before and you just didn't know it. It isn't light. It isn't trying to be. It's ballast for a day that will ask too much of everyone. Outside, the town remembers the rest of its errands. A bride's aunt arrives with a question about a tower of cakes for next month. The baker answers in tears and gestures, hands describing circles as if conjuring planets. A messenger in a leather cap comes empty and leaves with 2 wrapped loaves, one for his saddlebag, one for his mother, who claims honey cures everything except my manners. You linger, because this is the kind of food that rearranges your priorities. You think of all the places a cake goes in a year, feast tables leaning under candles, births where sugared crumbs announce that someone arrived safely, funerals where plates absorb tears and carry them away. Honey stands in for every word people can't say without binding their throats in knots. The baker catches you watching the cooling rack and lifts a small heel baker's privilege shared with you like a secret handshake. For the road, she says. The tide's right today. If you follow the lanes until the air smells like iron and salt, you'll find the fishers. They fry the throwaways, the skins. She tilts her head, listening to the far-off call you can't hear yet. When they're done right, they break like paper and taste like the whole sea at once. Sea. The syllable tastes briny even in your mouth. Suddenly you notice the hints you missed all morning. Gulls arguing on the wind, ropes creaking somewhere beyond the last cottage, the faint metallic breath of nets drying on posts. Your fingers are still sticky with honey when a new scent arrives, hot, fat, and salt, and it threads through the sweetness like a reminder that hunger has more than one dialect. You tuck the heel into your sleeve, thank the baker, and step back into a day that's tilt-shifting from flowers to foam. Between houses, the street narrows, the stones damp underfoot. A boy runs past carrying a wooden trident taller than he is. Someone calls a price in a voice meant to outshout waves. Somewhere ahead, oil snaps, a crowd laughs, and the gulls get louder because gulls always get louder when the truth is about to be delicious. You round the last corner and the wind hits you clean rope, tar, tide, and underneath it all, a sharp, irresistible crackle that sounds exactly like what the baker promised. Paper turning to music. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Not unpleasant, exactly, but unmistakable salt, oil, and something that once had gills. The sea lies ahead in a wide grey sprawl, its surface restless even when the wind stills. Nets hang like ghostly curtains between wooden poles, and the sand underfoot is more shell than soil. The dock is alive with motion. Men hauling ropes thick as wrists, women shouting prices, gulls plotting theft. And somewhere between the fish stalls and the boiling pots, that sound again crack, 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 like applause from a small, oily audience. You follow your nose toward a smoky hut with open shutters and a line of people clutching paper cones. The vendor is an old fisherman, wearing an apron that survived more meals than he has patience for. His hands move fast, dip, sizzle, drain, sprinkle. Whatever he's making, it hits the air in a golden flutter and vanishes into waiting hands before you can count to 3. You edge closer. Fish skins, he says before you even ask. Voice rough as rope. The bits nobody wants till they taste them. You blink. Just the skin? He grins, showing teeth like weathered pebbles. Aye. Waste not, want not. The rest goes to stew. But the skins, he flips one from the oil with his tongs, lets it curl midair, and catches it again. They're where the flavor hides. He drops it into a cone, dusts it with coarse salt and something that might be pepper or ash, and hands it over. Eat quick, they only behave while hot. You take one bite, and the world changes tempo. It shatters against your teeth, crisp but almost translucent, like eating smoke made solid. The salt hits first, then the deep, briny echo of the sea. Beneath that, something faintly sweet, fat, caramelized by heat into flavor rather than guilt. You chew again just to make sure it's real. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. All around you, people are eating the same way, standing, licking fingers, blowing on their hands. It's the kind of food that disappears between words. A sailor hums through a mouthful. A boy trades a coin for another cone and runs toward the surf. A dog, opportunistic and reverent, trails behind, waiting for generosity or gravity. The fisherman dumps another handful of skins into the oil. It protests with a hiss, a chorus of angry mermaids. They come from cod mostly, he says over the sound. Sometimes haddock, sometimes whatever swims close enough to the net. You can't waste the fat. Salt it, dry it, fry it, that's the law of the sea. You nod, watching the skins twist and curl like parchment in flame. They darken, then lighten, then settle into that fragile, glassy state that means they're done. He lifts them out with a small flourish, the kind that only comes from decades of repetition. It's a performance, but also a prayer. Medieval coastal towns like this one lived by the sea and died by it. Fish was currency, religion, punishment, and salvation. The church demanded fish on Fridays, on Lent, on days when meat was forbidden, which, in practice, was most of the calendar. For the inland poor, that meant dried cod, stiff as leather. For those lucky enough to live by the coast, it meant fresh bounty, but also endless monotony. Frying the scraps was rebellion disguised as thrift. A small act of culinary rebellion that said, we can make joy from what's left. You crunch another piece, and it sings between your teeth like brittle firewood. How long have you been doing this, you ask? Since I stopped going to sea, he says. Storm took my leg's patience before it took the leg itself. He taps his shin with the tongs, it sounds hollow, like wood. Now I fry. Less, drowning in this trade. He pours a measure of ale from a small jug, not for drinking but for batter. A bit of foam, he explains, keeps the skin lively. He stirs with a stick, pours the froth into the oil, and the smell blooms anew, salt meeting barley, sea meeting tavern. Next to him, a young girl, his granddaughter, maybe manages the fire with quick, practiced hands. She's no older than 14, but her eyes move like someone twice that age. She lays out the finished cracklings on a cloth to drain, then sprinkles them with something pale and gritty. Dried seaweed, she says when she catches you watching. Crushed. Adds the sea back in after the oil takes it out. You taste again. And sure enough, the flavor deepens. It's astonishing how something so small can hold so much story. The memory of tides, the labor of mending nets, the endless compromise between hunger and hope. Each bite tastes like work that somehow became art by accident. The girl laughs when you drop a crumb and a gull swoops down to claim it. See, even the thieves approve. You ask her if people always ate this, and she shakes her head. Only when times are thin, when the catch is gone to tax or tithe, and what's left wouldn't fill a cat. But now the travelers like it, say it tastes foreign. She grins. Imagine that. The sea, foreign. You smile, but her words land deeper than she knows. Food that once meant desperation now draws crowds. It's the eternal story of cuisine. Today's necessity, tomorrow's delicacy. You wonder what else in this town hides its genius under the label of scrap. The fisherman pours the last of the batter into the pan, then wipes his hands on his apron. No more for today, he says. The tide's turning. I'll need the oil for the lamps. You look around. The sun has slipped low, turning the waves to sheets of copper. Fishermen pull in their last nets. Children collect the day's broken shells as, though the sea owes them trinkets. The gulls grow bolder, diving at scraps, shouting their own gospel of greed. The smell of fried fish fades, replaced by the clean sting of salt and dusk. You thank him and step away, cone empty but spirit oddly full. The girl calls after you. If you're staying the night, go up by the cliff road. There's beer there colder than the priest's smile. She means the tavern perched above the harbour, the one you noticed earlier, with the crooked sign shaped like a barrel. Beer, in this world, is less drink and more survival fluid. Every road leads back to it eventually. As you climb the narrow lane, the sound of the sea falls away, replaced by laughter and the low drone of a song spilling from an open door. Inside, the tavern glows amber with candlelight. The air smells of malt, bread, and the faint citrus bite of hops. You realize that after a day of sweets, fats, and fried miracles, your throat has been quietly demanding this exact thing. Something bitter enough to balance it all. You step inside. The floorboards tilt slightly, as if remembering old ships. A brewer behind the bar lifts a pitcher and eyes you the way only someone with both authority and boredom can. Thirsty? You nod, dropping a few coins on the counter. Always. He pours from a large wooden cask, the liquid dark and foamy. The mug hits the counter with a thud. Ale, he says simply. Bread in liquid form. You'll like it better than the fish. You take a sip. It's cloudy, warm, and alive. The taste is deeper than water, and older than reason. A little sour, a little sweet, faintly smoky, faintly human. The brewer watches your reaction, half smiling. Not bad, eh? Wait till you hear what we make it from. You lower the mug, curious. What's that? He leans closer, voice low and amused. Water that isn't water, grain that isn't clean, and a yeast we've never properly introduced ourselves to. It's a miracle we survive it. You laugh, but there's something in his tone that makes the hairs rise on your arms. The way he says miracle sounds too serious, too old, too true. Outside, a gull screams like a warning. He pours another mug and sets it beside the first. Drink up, he says, eyes glinting in the candlelight. The next batch is nearly ready, and that one bites back. The mug is warm in your hands, its rim a little rough, its surface sweating faintly from the firelight. The tavern hums the way a beehive hums when the sun drops low, not loud, exactly, but alive. Conversations buzz in every corner. Farmers arguing about the price of barley, a pair of sailors bragging about storms they barely survived, a tanner trying to charm a brewer's daughter who clearly knows better. Every story ends in the same place, another round of ale. You take another sip, slower this time. The ale tastes old, in the best way like bread that learned to swim. It's cloudy, yeasty, alive in your mouth. Not crisp like the lagers of the modern world, but soft and round. More meal than drink. It leaves a faint film on your tongue, but it also leaves you strangely awake, like you've swallowed part of the firelight itself. The brewer leans across the counter, elbows creaking on the wood. That, he says, is what keeps the kingdom upright. Not kings, not prayers this. He taps the mug. Barley, water, yeast, and hope. You raise an eyebrow. And a lot of luck, I'd guess. He laughs. Luck? No. Luck's for gamblers. This is faith in fermentation. He gestures toward the back of the tavern, where a row of barrels crouch in the shadows, each one bound in iron hoops and faintly breathing. Those are alive, he says. Not like animals, not like people, but alive all the same. Feed them right, and they'll give you something better than water. Feed them wrong and they'll die, and take you with them. That's not hyperbole, in a world where drinking from the wrong stream could kill you faster than a sword. Ale was a miracle disguised as common sense. Boiling the water to make it safe, then fermenting it with yeast and barley, made it cleaner than most wells. Even children drank what they called small beer, mild, weak, more hydration than intoxication. The strong stuff, the tavern kind, was for adults and saints in temporary exile. You glance around. Everyone here looks content, but not drunk, not yet. Ale isn't about escape. It's about continuity. It fills the cracks of daily hunger and gives tired people something that feels like warmth, even when the fire goes out. The brewer slides a wooden bowl across the counter. Try that, he says. Inside is a strange, soggy mess, torn pieces of coarse bread, soaked through with ale. At first glance, it looks like regret. It's called soup, he explains. Or ale bread, if you want to be fancy. You'll see this on every poor man's table before the pressed. Night's done. You scoop a bite with your spoon. The texture's rough, but comforting, the grains swollen soft, the crusts gone tender. It tastes faintly of malt and wood smoke, like the ghost of beer with a conscience. It shouldn't work, but it does. Each bite feels like a sigh that forgot to end. Poor man's pudding, the brewer says. The rich eat trifle, the rest of us make do with this. He wipes his hands on his apron, leaving streaks that look like the map of a storm. Ain't fancy, but it keeps a belly from complaining. He's right, bread was life here, and ale was breath. Together, They became the glue that held people upright through cold seasons and colder fortunes. You can almost feel history settling in your stomach, simple, warm, relentless. The brewer tops off your mug. Want to know a secret? You nod. He grins. Half the people who think they're bakers are brewers in disguise. And half the brewers? They're bakers who got brewers. Impatient. He waves a hand toward the hearth, where another man is stirring a cauldron of froth. Same ingredients, same alchemy. Only difference is whether you want to chew your meal or drink it. You laugh, and he continues, eyes twinkling. Bread feeds the body, ale feeds the spirit. One rises with heat, the other with time. Both depend on yeast, a living thing smaller than a thought, older than any empire. Every loaf and every mug is proof that life insists on bubbling back. You swirl the last sip in your cup, watching tiny bubbles drift upward and vanish. You sound like a priest, you tell him. He shrugs. If priests used better ingredients, I might listen more. The tavern door bursts open before you can reply, letting in a rush of cold night and a man staggering under a barrel twice his size. His boots trail mud, his coat is wet with sea spray, and he's laughing like someone who's seen something terrible but survived anyway. Brought it, he bellows. Fresh from the convent cellars. The sisters brew better than the monks, I swear it. Everyone cheers as he rolls the barrel forward. The brewer snorts. He's not wrong, he mutters. Women always were better at timing. The new barrel thuds against the counter, the plug pops, and a darker, richer ale gushes out into waiting mugs. The smell changes immediately deeper, maltier, touched with spice. You take a sip when it reaches you. It's thicker, almost syrupy, with a bitter edge that lingers long after the swallow. Stronger, you say. Abbey brew, the brewer replies. Double fermented. Monks and nuns make it for healing, but they drink it for faith. He leans in conspiratorially. And if you drink enough, you start seeing angels. Trouble is, they don't always leave when you're sober. You laugh, but there's a truth in it. Ale wasn't just drink, it was medicine, comfort, even currency. Tithes were paid in barrels, rents in pints. Monks brewed by the gallon, travelers traded recipes, and every village swore their brew was blessed by a different saint. Some said the yeast carried prayers, others said it carried trouble. A group of sailors begin singing near the fire, a rough, uneven melody that smells of salt and memory. You find yourself tapping along. The brewer grins. See, that's the ale talking. Makes a man think he's got rhythm. The song builds, spilling into laughter and clinking mugs. It's easy to imagine this scene repeating across centuries, 1,000 nights, 1,000 taverns, the same warmth in different faces. The brewer leans back against the counter, voice lowering just enough to make you lean closer. There's another trick to ale, he says. You can eat it even after you've drunk your fill. You raise an eyebrow. How's that? He nods toward a woman at a table near the door. She's ladling something thick and golden into bowls bread again, but this time toasted and soaked in ale, then baked until the crust caramelizes into sweetness. Poor man's pudding, he says. A way to turn the last drops of beer into dessert. You take a spoonful when she offers it. The texture is heavy but luxurious, the taste somewhere between malt and molasses. You can feel it traveling down slowly, warming everything in its path. Dangerous stuff, the brewer says quietly. Why's that? He studies his hands. Too much comfort makes a man forget the world outside. People drown slower in ale than in the sea, but the end's the same if they don't come up for air. The fire snaps, throwing light across his face, one side golden, the other shadowed. For a moment, you glimpse something older in his expression, a fatigue worn smooth by years of laughter. Still, he adds, we drink because we remember the thirst. You nod. There's wisdom in that, the kind that doesn't need writing down. A bell clangs outside, sharp and unexpected. The tavern stills. Then the brewer exhales, uneasy. Tide's high tonight, he mutters. That's not the church bell. That's the watch. Another clang, closer now, urgent, metallic, wrong. People rise from their seats, heads turning toward the door. The brewer's daughter bursts in, cheeks flushed. "Flood," she gasps. "The river's jumped its banks. It's coming down the street." In an instant, the tavern erupts, benches scraping, mugs toppling, voices colliding in panic. The brewer grabs his apron and tosses it over the barrels. "Get upstairs," he shouts. "Take the lanterns, and for God's sake, keep the ale dry. We'll need it if we live through this." You look toward the door, where a thin sheet of water already glimmers in the lantern light, seeping across the threshold like a promise kept too soon. The first wave noses under the tavern door like a curious animal, then decides it owns the place. Shoes lift, benches scrape, and someone laughs the wrong kind of laugh, the brittle one people use when their hands are shaking. You help hoist a barrel up the stairs while the brewer curses the moon, the river, and every saint with a feast day in spring. Outside, lanterns skid on black water. The alley has become a stream. The stream is thinking hard about being a river. You wade for the door, the floorboards yawning under your boots. Out in the street, the town is a quick sketch, blurred with a wet sleeve. A washerwoman hustles past with a baby in a sling and a kettle on her head like a crown. Farther up the slope, a bell rings from a courtyard where the water hasn't yet arrived. A steward waves a torch and shouts, "This way, shelter." You follow the glow uphill, away from the river's impatient tongue. The courtyard belongs to people who own ledges and ceilings that don't leak. Torches gutter in iron brackets. A pair of carved lions look offended by the weather. Servants hustle blankets and brazier, coals into a long room, hung with woven stories of hunting parties that never met rain. You're handed a cloth to wring your sleeves and told to find heat and behave. A musician plucks a hesitant note as if testing whether sound still works. Inside, smells of beeswax and clove. Someone is mulled wine already. Copper pot, orange peel curling like a punctuation mark, spices dancing where steam begins. A footman bears in a tray of toasted bread, stacked like roof tiles. He moves with the speed of someone trained to look unhurried. The steward addresses the room. "Warm yourselves." His voice says, "Be grateful." His eyebrows say, "Don't drip on the tapestry." A woman in brocade gestures to the tray. "Sops," she says to no one in particular, but also to you. "For the nerves." The word lands like a small boat bread, made brave by wine. A servant ladles crimson comfort into shallow bowls. Another lays a slice of toast on top, so it floats a moment before surrendering. You take one cautiously. The heat rises, smelling of pepper and cinnamon, of grapes that outlived their vines. You lift the spoon. The bread gives in, then gathers itself, a soft raft with a spine. It tastes of warmth, disguised as fruit, of sweetness kept civil by spice, of a cellar's patience. The texture is gentle on teeth, still humming from the day's cracklings. The wine kisses your throat and leaves it less afraid. This is not the ale-soaked rescue you met in the tavern. This is its courtly cousin that never gets mud on its hem. It is not better. It is simply dressed for company. The woman watches you decide what you think. "They steadied me at my first wedding," she says, entirely serious. "And at my second." She dips her spoon like a curtsy. Bread to hold, wine to soften. It's a marriage of convenience. Most marriages are. You look into the bowl and see the logic. Starch tames spirits. Spice persuades the blood to keep moving. No one here says medicine, but the room believes in it anyway. A physician appears with the steam, offering commentary like garnish. "Hippocras," he pronounces, pinching a slice of orange from the rim of his cup. "Wine civilized by spice. Keeps the cold humors from colonizing the chest." He nods toward the brazier, as if it's a colleague. "Wet and fear are conspirators. We must oppose them with heat and story." Around you, shoulders settle. Fear loosens a notch under the combined argument of cinnamon and flame. Etiquette arrives in the wake of appetite. A lady demonstrates the approved method. Spoon from the edge, turn the bowl to chase cooler regions, never let the sop collapse into scandal. Someone adds a few almond slivers. Another drifts raisins across the surface like small boats finding harbor. The room murmurs approval in the language of people who seldom say what they mean directly. In this house, comfort wears manners. Servants circulate with more toast. You notice the bread is deliberate yesterday's, slightly stale, toasted to rigidity before its swan dive. Structure first, surrender later. A boy too young for wine is given broth and a crust. His eyes follow the crimson bowls like comets. A maid smuggles him a single raisin, the way saints smuggle miracles, and he looks briefly convinced that the world is not always cruel. Behind you, two merchants argue softly about routes. The road east washed, the bridge south doubtful. The warehouses will hold. One insists, his voice wobbling like jelly. The other studies his sop as if it contains maps. If not, he says, the river will keep our goods and pay no duty. Somewhere outside, something heavy knocks against a door and moves on, like a visitor who has changed his mind. You find yourself slowing to match the bowl. A sop insists you eat at its pace, not yours. It asks for patience, rewards it with warmth that spreads from sternum to jaw, a low tide of calm. Around you, laughter begins to return, small and wet at the corners, but genuine. Someone tells a story about a wedding where the cooks forgot the sugar and served sops that tasted of peppered regret. Everyone cried, he says. From sentiment or assault, I couldn't say. Then the steward, efficient even when damp, produces a silver dish. Lids lift, with a clink like coins agreeing. Inside, dried fruit figs fat as thumbs, dates glossy as secrets, raisins with the grin of the already wrinkled. The room inhales as one. These are not everyday things here either. They are months of sun carried in pockets through winter, sweetness stored against the hunger of grey days. They are also, you note, comically adhesive. A gentleman recommends soaking a fig in the warm wine to bring it back to its senses. A lady warns, mind your teeth, they take hostages. A servant threads a date with a clove and hands it to an old soldier, who eats it like a command. The physician declares dried fruit a temperate provocation, then proves his thesis by stealing a second helping. The bowl circulates and returns lighter every time. Your spoon finds the bottom of your cup, an island of bread you rescue in 2 careful bites. The room has reached that temporary peace. A storm sometimes grants the truce between first panic and next decision. The steward glances at the door where the wind has forgotten to rattle. The water is thinking, he announces. We will think faster. He orders mats for the threshold, ropes for the lane, lanterns for later. Servants go, taking the room's fear with them like coals carried in a pan. The lady in brocade nudges the fruit dish your way. Take one, she says. A fig discourages nightmares. You choose a raisin cluster instead, the kind that looks like it kept a vine's last laughter. It is intensely sweet, almost defiant, and astonishingly tenacious. It argues with your molars, then surrenders. You are suddenly, irrationally grateful for things that survive by becoming smaller. A boy runs in from the courtyard, hair slicked to his forehead. The river is resting, he announces, proud of his report. The steward nods. Then we will prepare for when it wakes. He turns to the table. Keep the wine warm. The command sounds like theology. The pot answers with a fragrant sigh. You rise to help carry blankets toward the lower hall, but a footman stops you gently and points to the fruit dish. Pocket some, he whispers. For later, it keeps. You tuck 2 figs and a clutch of raisins into your sleeve like a minor crime. The sop's heat has ebbed to a glow. The room's voices have stitched themselves into a comfortable cloth again. Beyond the door, the river rehearses its next move. You step into the corridor, where the air is cooler and the floor less certain. Somewhere below, a shutter thumps. Somewhere above, a beam remembers an older storm. You open your hand and look at the dried fruit, lying there time, made chewable, sweetness preserved by subtraction, joy that learned to travel. You think, this is what people carry when seasons turn against them. A shout cuts down the hall, urgent and excited. The storeroom. Someone calls. The crates from the summer caravans, they're dry. Another voice, half laughing. Dates from the Levant, figs from the islands, enough raisins to sweeten a monastery. Feet pound toward the stairs, and already you can smell it. Sun trapped in wood, spices waking at the thought of air, sugar announcing itself without apology. You follow the rush, fruit clenched in your fist, as a key scrapes a lock that hasn't turned since harvest. The storeroom smells like a memory, a blend of dust, resin, and faraway summers trapped in wood. When the key finally turns, a dozen people crowd the doorway, lanterns raised like a hesitant sunrise. Inside, stacked in neat wooden crates and wrapped in faded linen, are the treasures of warmer months. Dried figs, dates, prunes, raisins, apricots. Some boxes are stamped with foreign markings, letters curved like wind across sand. Each one hums faintly with its own story, whispered through syrup and sun. The steward pries open the first crate, and a wave of scent rolls out, sweetness laced with smoke, and that faint echo of fermentation, a hint that these fruits have been holding their breath for months. Someone gasps, someone else whistles low. Even the torches seem to lean closer. You reach in and pick up a fig. It's leathery, flattened, but soft at the edges, a small moon dulled by time. When you bite it, it pushes back chewy, dense, alive with sugar that tastes almost fermented. It's not just sweet, it's serious. The seeds crack like sand beneath your teeth. Careful, the steward warns, smiling despite himself. One fig too many, and you'll meet the saints by dawn. He's half joking, half quoting a superstition as old as the trade routes that carried these fruits. Here, in the medieval world, dried fruit was a luxury that walked the line between indulgence and danger. Too much of it heated the blood. According to physicians, a polite way of saying it made people impulsive, distracted, or, as one monk put it, susceptible to mischief. And maybe he was right. Because the longer you chew, the more the sweetness deepens, not just pleasant, but addictive. Each fig feels like it was made to remind you of everything that's been lost to winter. The steward gestures for a pair of servants to carry out the crates. "We'll dry the linens by the hearth," he says. "If the flood rises again, at least the sugar will float." Someone laughs, and the tension eases. Bowls appear, and soon the long table gleams under a mosaic of colors: golden apricots, black prunes like small shadows, amber dates slick with syrup that refuses to dry. The guests gather close, eyes shining as if gold coins have been poured out before them. The physician, never far from an audience, clears his throat. "Each fruit holds a climate," he declares. Apricots for warmth of temper, figs for strength of digestion, raisins for quickness of the mind, and prunes for, well, regularity. A ripple of laughter. He lifts a fig between two fingers. "And this," he adds, "is the sun, dried for transport." You try a date next, glossy, sticky, too rich to be modest. The skin splits under your teeth, releasing sweetness so deep it borders on indecent. There's a faint bitterness beneath it, the kind that makes the next bite necessary. You understand now why merchants risk deserts for them. They taste like wealth pretending to be fruit. "Imported," someone whispers, "from the Levant, traded for cloth and glass." You picture the journey, camels crossing white heat, jars sealed in beeswax, the smell of resin mingling with salt air in the hold of a ship. Weeks, months of travel, until finally here they end up, in a stone room on a wet night, being devoured by people who've never seen the tree that bore them. The steward slices open an apricot, and a trickle of syrup glues his fingers together. "These were laid out on rooftops," he says, "turned each day till the sun said enough." You can almost see it, women squinting in bright light, the fruit laid like offerings to the sky. The smell of sugar thick in the air. Bees hovering at the edges like priests at a feast. Someone dips a prune in warm wine, and the result is strangely moving, a small, wrinkled thing reborn in steam. "It's alive again," the woman says softly. The table laughs, but they all reach for their own bowls, soaking, tasting, reviving the past one bite at a time. It's easy to forget, amid the abundance, that these were once the scraps of summer. Drying fruit wasn't about luxury, it was survival. The sugar was preservation, nature's way of defying decay. For peasants, a handful of raisins could sweeten a year's worth of porridge. For nobles, a bowl like this was a parade of geography. The steward notices your curiosity and lowers his voice. We keep a few crates for trade, he says. But most go to the monastery. They use them in tonics and tarts. He pauses. And in penance. You raise an eyebrow. Penance? He nods. A monk once told me dried fruit tempts the tongue more than sin itself. So they eat it slowly, one piece at a time, until it stops being pleasure and starts being discipline. He chuckles. A fine theory, but I've yet to see a man repent halfway through a date. The rain outside has eased to a murmur. The windows glint, black and gold, and the air in the room grows heavy with the perfume of rehydrating fruit. You take another fig, this one split open by age. Inside, the seeds gleam like small stars. If the gods ever hid anything in plain sight, you think, this would be it. A servant brings bread, hard as wood but still, to warm from the hearth. Another brings cheese sharp, crumbly, a balance to the sweetness. The combination transforms everything. The salt of the cheese makes the figs taste richer, the bread anchors the syrup's chaos. For a brief moment, the table feels like peace itself, the kind that doesn't depend on weather. But peace never lasts long in old towns. The door bursts open again, wind dragging rain behind it. A man stands there, drenched and panting, his cloak streaked with mud. He's no servant. His boots are too fine, his ring too heavy. He looks like someone who's ridden through the flood, not away from it. Where's the steward? He demands, voice hoarse. Here, the steward answers, stepping forward. What news? The man holds up a dripping satchel. The bridge is gone. The river's swallowed the lower road. We found these floating against the pilings. He drops the bag onto the table. It lands with a wet thud. The drawstring loosens, and out spills. The strangest cargo, a mess of dark, sticky clumps. Raisins, thousands of them, waterlogged and glistening like drowned treasure. The guests recoil at first, then lean closer, fascinated. They were bound for the abbey, the messenger says. From the merchant's stores, the barrels split. We pulled what we could. The steward stares at the table, at the ruined fruit, at the fine silks splattered with wine and sugar, at the faces caught between hunger and awe. Then, very quietly, he says, nothing stays dry forever. You look down at the raisins, at the way they cling to one another in little constellations, and you realize they still smell faintly of sun, as if refusing to forget where they came from. The steward sighs. We'll dry them again, he says finally. The monks will take them. They can make their puddings and pretend they taste of heaven. The messenger shakes his head. You don't understand, he says. The abbey's cellars are under. Water too. The monks are camped in the bell tower, drinking the communion wine and praying it doesn't run out before morning. The room falls silent. Even the torches seem to hold their breath. Somewhere outside, the river groans against the stones. The steward turns to you, eyes unreadable. Then perhaps, he says slowly, it's time we took the sweetness to them instead. You follow his gaze toward the door, where the rain has thinned to a curtain of mist, and beyond it, the faint toll of a bell ringing through the flood. It's not calling for prayer this time. It's calling for help. By the time the rain loosens its grip, the lane is a string of mirrors. Lanterns are raised, blankets shouldered, and the steward's plan marches itself into being. Baskets of fruit for the bell tower, bread from the upper ovens, and something hot enough to fortify the people who will wade it there. Sugar soothes, yes, but what carries? What fills a chest with heat and keeps knees from shaking in cold water? You hear the answer before you see it. A wet, rhythmic chop, 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 then a hiss that sounds like iron deciding to sing. Around the corner, under a lean-to of patched canvas, a butcher's boy and his aunt are working at a low table lit by a single smoky lamp. The boy stirs a dark basin with a wooden paddle. The aunt tips in a pan of onions gone translucent in fat. The smell is deep and strange mineral, sweet, and a little like thunder. Stand back unless you're useful, the aunt says, not unkindly. We've got no time to explain supper. The steward steps in without ceremony. We need food that walks, he says. That swims, if it must, she grunts. Then you've found it. The basin holds fresh blood pigs, by the look kept from clotting with steady motion. The aunt sprinkles in oats with the calm of a woman who has measured by hand her entire life. A fistful for each hungry face, another for the ones who will arrive. Late, a little more for the boy who always lingers. Suet follows beef fat chopped fine, then a pinch of pepper, a breath of thyme, and the last of the morning sage crumbled between her fingers until it smells like resolved arguments. The boy adds a scoop of barley groats and keeps the paddle moving. What was liquid begins to thicken, the grains drinking the heat that will come. No animal has gone to waste today. The head is already simmering for broth somewhere, the feet promised to someone with patience, the offal pledged to a pot where everything becomes anonymous and kind. Here, in this bowl, the part that most spooks the polite world becomes courage with a crust. Never let it set before it's ready, the aunt mutters. The pan decides when you're done. She tests the mixture against the side of the basin with a practiced eye. Good enough to stand, she pronounces, and the boy begins to scoop. He palms portions like plums, rolls them quick, then dusts each, in coarse oatmeal, so they won't cling to each other or your fingers. A cauldron of fat-saved drippings, and today's generosity waits on a brazier, trembling just below a boil. The first ball slips in and vanishes. The surface rallies, then bursts in a constellation of small bubbles that smell like marrow waking. People gather by scent more surely than by bell. A fisherman with a split lip. A seamstress with needle marks like constellations. A mason whose hands still carry mortar. No one asks what they're made from, because the answer is obvious and, besides, irrelevant. You eat what brings you forward. The aunt works with both hands now, ball, pan, turn, lift, while the boy tends the fire with a fierce tenderness, feeding it in small, even breaths of kindling so the heat will stay honest. When the first batch climbs to the surface and frets at the edges, she snags them with a fork and lays them in a tray lined with scraps of stale bread to catch their courage. The bread will be eaten too, heavy with drippings, and someone will call it their favorite part. You take a ball the size of a small apple. Its crust is a freckled brown, slightly rough with oatmeal. You break it open. The interior is nearly black, glistening, flecked with onion and grain. Steam carries a scent like the inside of a forge after rain. You bite. The exterior shatters, then yields. The middle is tender, almost custard soft, rich with iron and smoke, with little sparks from the pepper when you don't expect them. It is bold, unembarrassed food, the kind that looks you straight in the eye. Someone at your elbow murmurs, "My grandmother called them courage balls." He smiles without humor. Said they put color in your face and a decision in your legs. He's right. 2 mouthfuls in, you feel a bloom of heat that has nothing to do with the brazier. Not a fiery heat, but the kind that sets its hands in the small of your back and says, "Move. We've work to do." The aunt keeps the rhythm steady. Between batches, she tips a splash of ale into the pan to lift what sticks. The smell climbs a rung higher toward comfort. A girl 7, maybe 8 appears with a basket and a command to carry to the old ones first. The aunt slides 6 balls in, throws in an extra as if to argue with fate, and ties the cloth tight. "Tell them to bite small," she says. No heroics in dentures. The stew of superstition simmers as surely as any pot. On one side of the lane, an old man mutters that blood should be returned to the earth, not eaten. On the other, a midwife counters that iron returns to iron, and the body knows a gift when it sees one. No one bothers the aunt with doctrine. She has a line. A miner arrives, face washed, hands not. He asks for 4, then looks ashamed and asks for 2. The aunt ignores his math and gives him 5. "For the climb," she says. He bows as if she's handed him a light. A young clerk in damp velvet hovers, trying to look like he belongs. The boy passes him a smaller one and says, "Hold it by the bread. If it burns, that's how you know it's good." The clerk laughs the laugh of a man who's never burned his tongue on anything he needed. He takes a careful bite, and then a careless second, eyes widening as the room rearranges itself inside him. The line shortens, then lengthens again, as word moves faster than water. Bowls arrive from the big house silver traded for speed and are filled without ceremony. Someone ties a string around a stack of 6 to lower to a neighbor who won't leave the second story. Somewhere behind you, a kettle begins to argue itself toward a boil for tea strong enough to peel paint. You turn to the steward. "The bell tower?" "Soon," he says, mouth full, eyes already on the route. "We'll carry fruit, bread, and these. The steps are narrow, people will need both hands." The aunt answers by making them smaller. The next batch comes out, walnut-sized, crisp in one bite, with a center that still remembers being almost liquid. "Marching food," she says. The boy nods, solemn as a deacon. A shout from the square snaps all heads around. The river's turned. Someone calls. It's peeling back. Relief ripples outward, and with it, the knowledge that after a night like this, morning will demand more than gratitude. It will demand repairs, apologies, and breakfast. You look at the dwindling tray. Will there be enough? "For now," the aunt says. "And in the morning, there's the griddle." "The griddle?" "Flour, egg, a lick of ale," she says, already wiping her hands and counting the hearts in the crowd. Flat cakes to stack in pockets. Quick to fry, quicker to eat. Even the pious can't argue with a pancake at first light. You can almost hear it, the dawn chorus of batter meeting iron. The cheerful spit of fat, the lift of a town that survived and insists on admitting it only with its mouth full. Somewhere, beyond the roofs, the bell answers itself, not frantic now, but steady, as if warming up for ordinary time. The steward breaks the spell. "Lanterns," he calls. "Ropes, 2 to the tower, 2 to the lower street, and a runner to the baker, with news that we'll need batter enough for a market." The boy thrusts a cone of the small ones into your hand. "For stairs," he says, "and because you look like you'll forget to chew." You tuck them under your cloak, the heat pulsing against your ribs. Outside, the air has changed, the metallic edge has softened. Wet stone now shares the night with chimney smoke and something you don't recognize yet, that hopeful, batterish smell of flour waking. The aunt sets one last pan on the brazier, then points her fork like a compass toward the eastern lane. "Find the baker," she says. "Tell her I'm sending iron and fat. If she primes the griddle by cockcrow, we'll turn the whole town into a stack. You step off the curb and into a street that is finally remembering it's a street." Behind you, oil whispers, bread drinks, and a fresh batch clicks together on the tray like marbles. Ahead, a door opens, and a flash of hot metal glows short, wide plates with hinges and long handles, patterned like flowers. They are not griddles, they are wafer irons. The sky hasn't quite turned blue yet, it's that pre-dawn shade that looks like the world's holding its breath. Smoke from last night's fires still hangs low, curling along the rooftops like it's afraid of heights. The rain's gone, the river's sulking back into its banks, and somewhere down the lane a rooster is already too ambitious for the hour. The village smells like aftermath, wet stone, cooling ash, and the faint iron tang of things that barely survived the night. And then, through all of that, you smell it, something so ordinary, so tenderly alive, that it hits harder than incense. Batter, warm flour, egg, and the first hiss of fat, meeting metal. You follow the scent around the corner to the bakery, where light spills from the half-open shutters in strips like golden ladders. Inside, the baker, the same woman who gave you honey cake only yesterday, is already moving at the pace of someone who never stopped. Her sleeves are rolled, her hair pinned in a knot of defiance. On the table before her, bowls of batter line up like soldiers, one thick, one thin, one flecked with herbs, one dusted with sugar. "You're early," she says without looking up. "You sent for me." She smirks. "I send for many people. You're the first to listen." The griddle sits on a broad iron stand, its surface blackened to perfection. She ladles a scoop of the thick batter onto it, and it spreads slow, steady, obedient. The sizzle fills the silence, the way music fills a church, not loud, but important. The smell blooms, warm, toasty, with that faint edge of sweetness that means eggs were sacrificed in good faith. She flips the first cake with a small flick of the wrist. Pancakes, she says simply. For the people who hauled ropes and buckets all night. They've earned round food. You watch as she works quick, methodical, almost reverent. Batter, turn, stack, repeat. She slides the finished ones onto a wooden plate and hands it to a passing girl, who vanishes out the door and down the lane toward the lower houses. She'll feed the masons first, the baker says. If the walls dry by noon, we can save the bread ovens by dusk. The griddle pops again. She pours more batter, this one thinner, almost liquid. These, she says, are for the church. You blink. The church, aren't they? Stranded in the tower, she finishes. Aye. But stranded priests still expect wafers for morning prayers. You glance at the second iron warming by the fire, smaller, hinged, carved with patterns of vines and crosses. It looks like something between a weapon and a promise. You'll make communion wafers before breakfast? She shrugs. Might as well give them something to chew on while they wait for rescue. She opens the iron, ladles in a thin spoonful of the pale batter, then presses it shut. Steam escapes through the edges like the iron is exhaling. When she opens it again, the wafer lies inside, delicate, round, embossed with a design so fine it looks almost impossible. The smell isn't rich like pancakes, it's clean, faintly toasty, the scent of faith baked into form. She lifts it out with a knife and sets it on a cloth to cool. For nobles and monks, faith tastes of flour, she says. For the rest of us, it tastes of grease and luck. The words hang in the warm air. You help her for a while, stacking pancakes, turning wafers, trading silences between the rhythm of her work. She tells you about how Shrove Tuesday Pancake Day is when the village uses up its eggs, milk, and fat before Lent. Better in your belly than wasted, she says. After that, no more comfort till Easter. You glance at the dwindling bowl of batter. So this is the last feast before the fast. Aye, she says softly. Eat like it's mercy. Her assistant, a young boy with flour on his cheek, bursts through the back door. The monks, he pants. They've made it down the hill. The baker sets her ladle aside and wipes her hands. Bring them in. They'll be cold and pious. Moments later, a line of dripping monks files through the doorway, their habits clinging like wet sails. They look more human than holy eyes red, hands raw, their dignity hanging by a thread and a hymn. The first among them, an elderly man with a face carved by years of prayer, smiles faintly. We smelled grace, he says. The baker bows her head slightly. You smelled breakfast. He laughs, the sound dry as parchment. Sometimes that's the same thing. She gestures to the table, to the wafers cooling in neat rows. These are for your altar, she says. But the rest, she nods toward the stack of pancakes, are for your bellies. The monks hesitate only long enough to remember decorum. Then they eat. Slowly at first, then faster. Pancakes vanish, like prayers answered in reverse. A few of the younger ones drizzle theirs with honey, whispering apologies between bites. The oldest monk sighs, pressing his palms together. We shall confess to gluttony later, he says. But not yet. As the baker returns to her griddle, one of the monks lifts the wafer iron from the fire and studies it. This tool, he says, was once forbidden to all but the clergy. She glances at him. And now it makes snacks for the docks. Progress, he murmurs. She laughs, a quick, tired sound. No, father, hunger. For a moment, everything pauses. The dawn light finally finds its way through the shutters, turning the flour dust in the air to gold. Fire crackles. Somewhere outside, someone is singing not beautifully, but honestly, the kind of song that belongs to people who made it through the night and decided, tentatively, to keep going. The baker ladles more batter. You know, she says, the first wafers weren't holy, they were just street food. The word waffle meant honeycomb, a sweet pressed between irons and sold at fairs. It's only later someone decided to feed them to God. The monk chuckles softly. And now you make them again. A circle closes, she says. Or at least folds in on itself like batter on a hot plate. He nods, solemn. Perhaps the divine has a sweet tooth. You can't help smiling. If so, he's well fed this morning. Outside, the church bell rings again, this time slow and steady, not warning, not alarm, just the simple rhythm of survival marking the hour. The baker listens, flips a pancake, then looks at you. You hear that? You nod. That's the sound of the town forgiving itself. She slides the last stack onto a plate and dusts it with sugar. But forgiveness doesn't last long, she says quietly. By noon, they'll be arguing again. Taxes. Repairs. Whose wall gave way first? The same old noise. You ask, what about you? I'll still be here, she says. Batter never argues. A gust of wind pushes through the open shutters, scattering flour across the counter like snowfall. The light catches it, and for a heartbeat the whole room looks like a miracle waiting to rise. Then the door slams open. The boy rushes in, hair wild, voice sharp with excitement. The road. He shouts. The traders are coming through. Caravans from the south, they've got sugar, spices, and fruit. They're heading for the market square. The baker straightens, eyes bright despite the exhaustion. Fresh sugar? The boy nods, panting. And barrels of it. They say the first sucket of the season's already been made. Her smile is quick, fierce, like fire catching kindling. Then we're not done feasting after all, she says. The nobles will want their candied fruit before sunset. You glance toward the open door, where sunlight now strikes the wet street and makes it glitter. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, you can almost smell it already, the sharp perfume of boiling syrup, citrus peel curling in copper, and the unmistakable tang of something being turned from perishable to eternal. The baker tosses you a clean apron. Well, she says, you've eaten enough pancakes to pay rent. Time to learn what luxury smells like. You tie the apron around your waist, and together you step into the brightness of morning toward the market, toward the sugar merchants, and toward a sweetness so rich it once defined sin itself. By late morning the market square has shed its night-sick look and dressed itself for spectacle. Carts creak in over the glittering mud, their wheels rimmed with crusted salt from far roads. Boys run ahead waving sprigs of bay, shouting news like it's a commodity. Sugar, oranges, ginger like fire. The square answers with a hush that isn't silence so much as attention. Every head turns toward the traders' awnings where copper pans already flash like small suns. You and the baker reach the stall just as a lid lifts. The first perfume is unmistakable hot syrup riding a citric edge, bright enough to make your mouth water before your mind agrees. The merchant works with a slotted spoon, carved thin as a saint's patience, fishing out slices of peel glazed into stained glass. They tremble, then hold. Suck it, fruit conquered by heat and repetition until sweetness sets like armor. Stand close, the baker says, tying your apron tighter. Sugar behaves for the bold. The merchant's apprentice tips in fresh pieces, orange rind trimmed to neat moons, slivers of quince, shards of pear the color of old vellum. The syrup heaves once, then resumes its calm boil, a disciplined sea. A second pan hums with ginger batons. A third holds tiny green things that look like captured leaves. Citron, the merchant says with a pride that doesn't need witnesses. Months of sea for that. You take the ladle he offers and learn the rhythm. Drown, lift, drip, lay. Each pass coats the fruit in a thinner sugar skin, a ritual repeated until the syrup and the thing inside agree on terms. The baker tests a piece against the cool air. It goes tacky, not brittle. Again, she orders. Sugar is a ladder you climb till your knees shake. Around you, the crowd becomes a pageant. A cloth dealer bargains in a voice pitched like a flute. A steward's clerk records weights, tongue peaking as if numbers taste sweet too. A little girl watches the ginger with ferocious longing. The merchant winks and drops a scrap in her palm. She gasps, chews, fans her mouth, and then grins like she's survived a dragon. Not far off, a priest pinches a raisin from a platter and pretends he hasn't. Beside him, a noble woman, sleeves slashed to show silk, weighs a jar of sugar like a general weighs powder. For the Lord's table, she announces, as if the square had asked. Suck it for the afternoon collation, nothing cloying. The baker's eyebrow twitches. Nothing cloying, she repeats, tipping another ladle of syrup that could glue a ship. The merchant closes his hand around a tiny gilded scoop. Dusting, he murmurs, and showers the newest batch with a veil of fine sugar that settles like frost. The pieces gleam with a self-conscious virtue, as if they've heard about saints and want their best angle. When you lift one to the light, it glows from within winter glass, bottling a foreign sun. The baker nudges you. Taste. You do. The shell resists, then relents. The peel inside gives a low, bitter hymn that the sugar doesn't smother but translates. Ginger pricks your tongue, like bright needles. Quince sighs like a well-behaved apple. It is not the bulky comfort of honey cake. This is a court trick discipline disguised as luxury. You want another. You want 15. You want to be the kind of person who can afford restraint. The bell from the wharf cuts through the perfume 2 quick strikes, the signal for fresh catch hauled up the quay. The square pivots. Sugar's spell loosens its fingers as noses swivel toward a new smell. River on iron, flesh on heat, fat promising a verdict. You and the baker trade a look. Fish, she says. Before the nobles buy up the day. Down the harbour steps, fishers lay their prize on boards dark with brine, not scaled, not filleted coils that glisten like wet rope. Eel. In a world that forbids meat half the days on the calendar, this creature swims straight through the loophole and onto every plate ambitious enough to forgive its face. The monger's knife moves with the certainty of old dislike, a cut behind. The head, a strip of skin pulled like a tight glove. Slices made on the bias so the bones have some place to hide. Fresh as forgiveness, the monger crows, tipping a pan so the pieces slip into waiting fat. The oil answers with a sound like applause, heard from a distance. The eel curls as it fries, each segment crisping along its edges, the middle turning from glassy to firm. Someone throws a pinch of parsley. Someone else swears by vinegar. The smell is strange, and promising the sea tamed by heat. The river persuaded to be a street food. You buy a paper twist and take a bite while it's still a bad idea. The crust shatters. Beneath it, the flesh is delicate, almost buttery, richer than any fish has a right to be, and far cleaner than rumor. A spike of bone reminds you who's in charge, then yields with a twist of your tongue. Salt licks your lips. A drop of fat declares a brief independence down your wrist. Around you the doctrine of eel expands by anecdote. Kings, table. Someone boasts. A pie with 30 eels once, lidded like a tomb. A monk counters. On fast days it saves us from sin and starvation both. A boy says nothing, just eats with eyes closed like a prayer that forgot words. The baker tastes, nods, and starts doing what bakers do, solving. Flour, she says. A dust before the pan. And a bath after, with vinegar and pepper. The monger snorts at first, then shrugs, then obeys the woman everyone obeys. The next batch comes out with an audible crisp that makes the line lean forward as one organism. The vinegar hisses when it hits. The pepper speaks in lowercase but carries. You notice coins moving faster now. Sugar for the afternoon, eel for the now. The market runs on a kind of double appetite. Delicacy to hoard, grease to live. A friar buys both and tells no one. A piper plays a tune that sounds exactly like trying not to dance. The flood has left its watermark on every threshold, but the square's pulse has returned to its old tempo. Hunger answered, desire negotiated. Gossip condensed into useful facts. Who has lemons? Who has beds? Who has both? Close by, the sugar stall apprentice flips a final batch and turns down the fire. Set, he announces, tapping the pan with a spoon. The slices harden to a quiet shine, little saints with sticky halos. The noble woman's steward arrives with a box lined in parchment and anxiety. Mind the corners, he begs. Her ladyship hates a smudge. The eel man wipes his knife and grins at the baker. You've made enemies, he says cheerfully. Everyone will want it your way now. She shrugs. If they're eating it, I don't mind their names. Afternoon tilts. The square's shadows lengthen into blue. Sucket jars vanish into sleeves and litters. Eel pans empty and fill, until the oil itself looks tired. You lick a last sugar crust from your thumb and chase it with a last scrap of crisp skin. Sweetness and salt declare a temporary truce somewhere behind your eyes. A bell you don't recognize rings from the far side of town 3 slow strokes, and then a pause that pulls at the air like a tide. People turn, listening as if the sound is calling a role they hope to be on. The baker's face changes first. She wipes her hands and unties her apron like a woman who has remembered something she can't argue with. What is it, you ask? Evening, she says. The kind that doesn't forgive noise. Stalls begin to shutter. Lanterns bud along the eaves. The merchants wrap their pans in rags and talk softly to their animals the way sailors talk to ships. Above the river, clouds gather into velvet. The sugar merchant presses a twist of candied peel into your hand against the dark. The eelmonger tosses you one last piece. Against the saints. The baker nods toward the lane that leads uphill. To the narrow street where windows glow like respectful stars. Walk with me, she says. There's one last thing you should taste before the night decides we've talked enough. You fall into step. The market's chatter recedes to a murmur. Then to the soft scuff of boots on damp stone. Behind you, someone douses a brazier. The smoke rises like a prayer that knows it will be answered in ash. Ahead, a door opens on a thin wedge of gold and closes again, as if the house has tested the night and agreed to share it. You turn the final corner. The lane narrows to a thought. The baker lifts a latch you didn't see and leads you into a small courtyard where a single candle burns under a clay hood, the flame steady as breath. On a low table sits a plain wooden cup, warm to the touch, and beside it, a heel of bread saved from the morning. This, she whispers, is how a town sleeps. You raise the cup, and a shadow crosses the doorway. The shadow hesitates in the doorway. For a breath, neither you nor the baker moves. Then the shape resolves into something. Human the steward, his cloak damp again, a lantern swinging low from his hand. You're both hard to find, he says, voice softened by exhaustion. But I should have guessed you'd end here, where there's light and something warm that smells like gratitude. The baker smiles faintly. We ran out of gratitude hours ago, she says. This is barley broth and stubbornness. She gestures to the cup on the table. Sit, drink. There's room in the dark if you behave. The steward obeys without argument. His boots leave small dark prints on the stone floor, prints that vanish as quickly as they form. He sets the lantern down beside the candle, and for a moment the two flames converse, one tall and confident, one small and loyal. Their light touches the courtyard's edges, showing walls that have seen everything. Flood, fire, feast, and now this the stillness after all three. You sit beside them, the wooden bench creaking under the memory of long use. The baker pours more broth from a small pot balanced over a glowing coal. The smell drifts upward, earthy, clean, the kind of aroma that makes hunger gentle instead of cruel. The steam catches the candlelight, twisting into ghostly ribbons that dance like stories told too late. The steward lifts his cup and drinks, his face eases. It's better than wine, he admits. No repentance required. The baker shrugs. Wine tells you what you already feel. Broth tells you what you forgot. He chuckles softly. Then tonight, I've forgotten quite a lot. You taste it too, barley, a hint of onion, maybe a bone boiled long enough to surrender its memory. There's comfort in its simplicity. After a day of sugar and salt, of fire and flood, This is what the world has been building toward, a bowl of quiet. Outside, the wind slides along the eaves like fingers through hair. The sky has gone full indigo, stitched with a few cautious stars. You can hear the faint hum of the river below, slower now, chastened but still alive. Somewhere distant, a dog barks once and decides it's too tired for conversation. The baker reaches for a small loaf wrapped in cloth, the same one she saved from the morning's batch. She breaks it with her hands. "Bread's honest when it's cold," she says, handing you a piece. The crust is hard, the inside soft enough to remember warmth. You dip it in the broth, and it drinks like a thirsty pilgrim. The steward chews in silence, his gaze on the candle's flame. "Funny thing," he says finally. "We began the day pulling people from water, and we end it teaching the dark to behave." The baker tilts her head. "You make it sound like we've done something remarkable. Haven't we?" She shakes her head. "No. We've done something ordinary. That's harder." You can't help smiling. Ordinary is the only miracle people believe twice. The candle crackles, agreeing in its small languageless way. The baker leans back against the wall. "You know," she says, "I used to think night was for sleeping. Now I think it's for remembering why you should bother." The steward laughs quietly. "Then let's remember, before the remembering costs us our peace." He sets his cup down, elbows on his knees, and looks at you. "Tell me, traveler, what will you remember from today?" You look around at the flickering light, the tired faces, the bread between your fingers, the hum of a world that somehow keeps itself upright. The smell of apple fritters in the fog, you say slowly. The taste of fried eel, pretending to be rich. The way sugar made everyone polite for 5 minutes. The flood that almost washed us away. And the sound of people forgiving each other through food. The baker smiles, small but real. "That's a good ledger. You'll sleep fine." The steward exhales, long and deep. Then the day's spent well enough. He rises, his knees cracking like doors in an old hall. "I'll make my rounds one last time, see if the water's behaving." You two keep the candle company. When he's gone, the courtyard seems bigger, the shadows friendlier. The baker leans forward, staring into the small flame. "He'll find the water fine," she murmurs. "The river knows when it's fed." You nod, watching how the light paints her face in bronze and soft shadow. "And when it's forgiven?" She chuckles under her breath. "Rivers don't need forgiveness. Only people do." Silence folds over you both, but it's not empty. It's the kind of silence that has muscles steady, kind, full of heartbeat. Somewhere above, an owl calls, and a moment later, another answers. You realize this is the first night in days that doesn't smell like smoke or fear. The baker pushes the last of the bread toward you. "Eat," she says. "Tomorrow we'll pretend it's an ordinary morning." What's ordinary? Flour. Sleep. Someone else's gossip. You laugh quietly. "And if that fails?" She glances at the candle. "Then we'll make more batter." For a while, you both just sit. The candle burns low, its wick curling like a tired smile. The flame dips, steadies, dips again. The baker refills your cup, though neither of you really needs it. In the quiet, the sounds of the town return in small pieces, a door bolt sliding home, a lullaby sung to an infant, the distant clink of a blacksmith's chain hung to dry. The world, it seems, is rebuilding itself, one sound at a time. You think of the monks in their tower, the market full of laughter and greed, the eelmonger bragging over his pan, the baker's hands tracing circles into batter like prayers she didn't know she was saying. All of it feels impossibly far away and impossibly close. The baker stands finally, stretching, and carries the pot toward the coals. "We'll leave the candle till morning," she says. "It's good manners too. Let the dark know where you've gone." You stay seated, watching her shadow move across the wall, tall and certain. When she disappears through the door, the quiet folds itself around you again, softer this time. The candle trembles. You can hear its tiny breath, the whisper of melting wax, the faint hiss of wick. It's the last voice of the day. and it speaks in light. You watch as it leans left, then right, bowing to no one, yet answering everyone. For a long moment, the entire courtyard seems to hold still, waiting for the flame to choose. Then just as your eyes begin to close, the wick straightens, flares, and sends one thin line of smoke curling upward into the night, as if drawing a road that only the brave can see. From somewhere beyond the walls, distant, uncertain, but real, a bell tolls once. Not warning this time, not prayer, just the sound of time itself clearing its throat. The candle gutters, the courtyard exhales, and you realize that history, like sleep, like hunger, like every small mercy shared between strangers, is never really over. It just waits for someone to relight the flame. If tonight's journey helped you drift off, dream deeper, or simply see the past in a softer light, don't forget to keep the candle burning. Subscribe to Candlelit History for a new story every week, cozy, calm, and crafted to help you sleep while you learn. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're listening from, or what time it is where you are. Like the video if it helped you unwind, it really supports the channel. Tap the bell so you'll be the first to join our next late-night journey through forgotten centuries. And as always, good night, travelers. Sleep softly, dream brightly, and may your history stay candlelit.